Today, I'm going to be discussing the true story of a husband and wife in Tennessee who were literally days from enjoying their retirement when they were savagely and brutally murdered in their own home. But what makes this story so shocking is who they were killed by. This is the tragic true story of Joel and Lisa Guy. Welcome to Severed Soul. Joel Michael Guy was born on the 10th of February 1955 in East Tennessee, and he worked as a pipeline design engineer. Now, this story centres around Joel and Lisa Guy. However, it is worth mentioning that Joel was actually married before he met Lisa. So, Joel married his first wife, Patricia, in 1973, and they had 3 daughters together. And they were the twins, Michelle and Angela, and then there was also Shandice. Now, Joel and Patricia were actually married twice. The first time it didn't work out, so they got divorced, decided to give it another shot, got married again, and then separated for good. Joel then went on to marry his second wife, Lisa, in 1985 in Knoxville, Tennessee. So, anyone that knew Joel and Lisa would say that they were the perfect couple. You could say that they were soulmates, truly made for each other. Lisa was born on August the 8th, 1961, and she worked as a HR accountants administrator at a local company called Jacobs Engineering. So, Joel and Lisa were just completely head over heels in love with each other. They shared this great sense of humour, and they were just totally kind-hearted and compassionate towards each other. What more could you want from a relationship, right? But they also just had loads in common with each other. They both loved being outdoors, they loved spending time on the water, they both just had this real sense of adventure. And they were both really family-oriented too. They loved their kids and absolutely adored their 6 grandkids, and of course, their beloved dog, Jay. Lisa welcomed Joel's daughters with open arms whenever they came to visit. There was no step-parent, step-child animosity, it was just generally a very happy home. Then, on 13th of March 1998, their family was completed when Lisa gave birth and they welcomed Joel Michael Guy Jr. into their lives. On Thursday 24th of December 2016, Joel and Lisa hosted a Thanksgiving dinner to celebrate Thanksgiving, obviously. But this year, Thanksgiving was extra special because the couple also had another reason to celebrate. They were officially announcing their retirement. They'd just completed the sale of their home in Knoxville and were moving to a lovely retirement property that they were purchasing from Joel's sister Robin in Seguinsville. And so this meant that this would be the last Thanksgiving that the family shared together in this home. So it was a happy occasion, but also slightly sad too. I mean, they'd made so many fond memories in this house over the years. This was their family home. As the family sat around the table together, the smell of turkey, stuffing and roast vegetables filled the air, and the music played quietly in the background, creating a lovely, homely atmosphere. Lisa walked around with a freshly opened bottle of champagne topping up drinks as Joel teased the grandkids and Michelle and Joel Jr. reminisced about the old times growing up. Now, it was uncommon for Joel Jr. to attend family events for one reason or another. He always seemed to miss out. Or even if he was there, he'd just kinda stay out the way in his bedroom or whatever. So it felt incredibly special to Joel Sr. having his son there to celebrate with them. However, it was kind of bittersweet. As lovely as it was to have Joel Jr. and Michelle there, what Joel and Lisa really wanted was for their other 2 daughters, Angela and Shandice, to join in the celebrations with them. But it wasn't to be. Now, it's unclear exactly why Angela and Shandice decided not to go and join in the celebrations, but it's speculated that they were unhappy with the way Joel and Lisa still heavily supported Joel Jr. financially. I mean, he was 27 and he was able-bodied and sound of mind, so the general feeling was that he should be standing on his own 2 feet by now. Despite this, the family enjoyed a delicious Thanksgiving dinner together. A lovely time was had by all, and the day was generally seen as a success. On Monday, 27th of November, staff at Jacobs Engineering Services in Knoxville had arrived early for their shift. You see, usually their shift started at 7 a.m, but today was different. They'd arrived early and were making preparations for a party, because today they were celebrating a special occasion. And that special occasion was Lisa's retirement. So Just as they were excitedly hanging the final few banners and inflating the last few balloons, they were eagerly anticipating Lisa walking through that door for the very last time. So they waited, and they waited. Any second now, Lisa's going to walk through that door. But Lisa never came. 5 minutes went by, then 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, and still no Lisa. Now, this was incredibly uncharacteristic of Lisa. If there was one thing she was known for above all else, it was her reliability. She was literally never off sick, and she was very rarely late. And even if she was running late, she would always give her manager a courtesy call just to give her that heads up. So at 7:15 a.m, Lisa's manager, Jennifer, was nervously looking at her watch, and she said to one of the other staff members, "This is really unlike Lisa, this is. I'll just give her a call to check she's okay." When Lisa hadn't answered after a few tries, Jennifer tried calling Joel to see if he knew where Lisa was, but he didn't answer either. After 20 unanswered calls, Jennifer made the decision to call the police to ask them to just go and give a welfare check at Joel and Lisa's property. So the operator on the call obliged and sent over some on-duty officers to investigate. Officers Stephen Ballard and Jeremy Clinton arrived on the scene. They climbed out of their patrol cars, closed the doors, and assessed the situation. Now, there were a few things that instantly stood out to the officers on arrival. There were 2 cars parked on the driveway, the hallway light was on inside the house, and when they tried the doors, they could hear a dog barking from inside the house. The officers agreed that someone must be inside the house, so they walked around to the side of the property. There was also a window at the side of the house which was slightly ajar, and they could literally feel heat emanating from inside the house, along with a suspicious sort of potent chemical smell. So, through this window, the officers could see into the kitchen, and they could see grocery bags on the floor with like meat and ice cream and stuff. All the things you really don't want to leave out in a warm house for too long. You know, as soon as you get in, you put that shit away. Officer Ballard called in through the window, but there was still no response. So, alarm bells were definitely ringing at this point. Now, the officers knocked on the door repeatedly. No answer. So they rang the doorbell. Still nothing. So they tried the side gate, which was locked. Ballard calls dispatch and he's like, "I can't make contact with anyone inside the house." But he explains the situation to the operator and asks them to send backup because, well, it's not looking good. So, detectives Jeremy McCord and James Couch arrived at the property, and Ballard and Clinton gave them a rundown of what they've found so far. So, the detectives perform their own checks, and they can't get a response either, so they agree that they really need to gain access to the inside of the property because, clearly, something wasn't right. So, instead of just breaking the door down, there's a sale sign on the front lawn, so they call the phone number on the sign for the realtor and ask for the key to the house. And the realtor's like, "Yeah, sure, there's a lockbox on the front of the house, there's a key in there, I'll get you the code." So the detectives have a look, and they can clearly see where a lockbox should definitely be, but it's been removed. Not only had the lockbox been removed, but also the front door handle had been replaced with a handle which clearly didn't belong to that door. And also when they checked the back door, the handle on the back door had been completely removed. So shit was getting more and more suspicious by the minute. Well, the realtor, who was still on the phone, said, "Why don't you check one of the cars? Maybe one of the car doors is open, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find the garage door remote in there." So Detective McCord checks the car door handle. The door opens, and inside the car, he finds the garage door remote. Now, I'm sorry, but how the fuck did the realtor know that? That's suspicious as fuck, that is. So, now the police have access to the house, and I'm going to pre-warn you. If you have a weak stomach, then click away now, because what the police found inside this house is nothing short of a fucking massacre. When the officers entered the house through the garage, the first thing they noticed was the heat. The difference of the temperature inside the house compared to outside was extremely noticeable. It was literally like a furnace. The second thing they noticed was that smell. The chemical smell they could smell through the open window when they were outside that smell was just like really overpowering, to the point where it was like literally burning their eyes. I presume it's like when you chop onions, that shit is intense. So once they're inside the garage, there's another door which is closed. So they knock on the door and there's still no answer, so they open the door and walk inside to the house. The first room that they walk into is the kitchen, and again the heat is just unbearable. And they notice that the stove and oven are both on, and there's a large covered pot boiling on the stove. It's all just really fucking weird. On the kitchen table they find some random items. There's 2 wallets, a handbag, a bunch of cash and a set of adjustable grips. Then on the floor next to the table is a load of bags with what looks like cleaning items like towels, bleach and baking soda, I think. So at this stage, the officers are nervously looking at each other as if to say, I think we're going to find something terrible in this house. There was just this really intense, ominous feeling. Then one of the officers turned the stove and oven off before continuing their sweep of the house. In the dining room too, there was just loads of other random stuff on the table and the floor. There were weapons like rifles and shotguns and loads of ammunition all stacked up on the floor. Then also, downstairs, they noticed that the thermostat was set to the maximum temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 32 degrees Celsius, so it literally felt like they were walking around in a sauna. Once they finished downstairs, the officers made their way upstairs, and as they walked up the stairs, they see their first real evidence that something awful has happened in this house. There were blood splatters on the wall and the carpet leading up to the stairs. And then at the top of the stairs, on the landing, there's a pile of women's clothes, scissors, and containers with some kind of chemicals in, and another bloodstain. Now, when they walked into the master bedroom, it just looked sinister straight away. There were like plastic sheets on the floor and some large plastic containers, and one of the officers walks over. He lifts the lid off one of the containers and looks inside. And he immediately looks away. He starts to gag and he's like, oh, fucking hell. He calls one of the detectives over and he's like, you need to come and look at this. In the containers is what the officers described as a diabolical stew of human remains. It was literally a tub of human body parts and what I can only presume must be acid. I think someone had been watching Breaking Bad. If you know, you know. But wait, it gets worse. Much, much worse, trust me. In the guest bathroom, there was a pile of men's clothes on the floor, and there was just blood and bandages everywhere, and then on the counter of the bathroom by the sink was another sharp knife. Now, one of the other spare bedrooms had been converted into a workout room, like a little home gym sort of thing. And in this room, the police made a very disturbing and gruesome discovery. In the corner of the room, there was a large pool of blood on the floor, and next to the pool of blood was a pair of severed human male hands. Yes, you heard that right, severed hands. Now, what makes this discovery so sick and twisted is the way the hands were placed. You see, these hands hadn't just been hacked off and thrown on the floor, no. They were placed on the floor with the severed bloody stump ends, so the wrist, facing down on the carpet. Then the fingers were pointing upright and intertwined. So basically, they'd been positioned in a prayer pose. Honestly, it's fucking demented. And it's not like they were just hacked off with a saw or an axe either. The hands were severed with such concise precision that the cuts almost appeared to be surgical. The exercise equipment had been knocked over and the blinds on the window were also damaged, so it definitely looked like a struggle had taken place in this room. Finding those severed hands in the gym room and the body parts in the spare bedroom was obviously an incredibly disturbing discovery for the detectives. Now, finding those severed hands in the gym room and the body parts in the spare bedroom was obviously an incredibly disturbing discovery for the detectives, but the worst was yet to come. Now, remember down in the kitchen, the oven was on and the stove was on, and there was a covered pot on the stove which was still boiling away. Well, when they took the lid off that pot and looked inside, staring back at them was a female human head. Yes, this victim had been decapitated and her head was boiling in a pot on the stove. Now, although we can safely presume that the bodies belonged to Joel and Lisa, and the police were 99.9% sure that this was the case, without DNA test results, they couldn't say for absolute certain that Joel and Lisa were the murder victims. So, once the forensics team had been in and done their thing, all evidence, including the human remains, was sent off to be tested. While they were waiting for the results to come back, police started to question any potential witnesses, including neighbours and family members. When the police asked one of the neighbours if they'd seen or heard from Joel and Lisa, the next door neighbour said the last time they'd seen the couple was on Thanksgiving when they'd had Joel Jr., Michelle and the grandkids over to visit. And all the neighbours pretty much said the same things about the Guy family. They were always super friendly and polite, pillars of the community, that sort of thing. In fact, the neighbours were in complete shock about what had happened. I mean, obviously, your neighbours have been murdered. You're gonna be in shock. But nobody had anything negative to say about the Guy family at all. So the next port of call was to contact family members, specifically those who were at the house on Thanksgiving, firstly to break the tragic news, but also to ask questions and hopefully get some answers. So they decided to contact the family members who were at the Thanksgiving dinner first, and they started with Michelle. Now, obviously, when the detectives broke the news to Michelle, she was completely distraught. She loved her dad to bits, and she was also incredibly fond of Lisa too. Michelle's kids just saw Lisa as their gran, so in addition to managing her own grief, she was also dreading breaking the news to her children. Michelle explained that the last time she'd seen her parents was on Thanksgiving Day, and then the detectives asked who else was in attendance, and Michelle was like, well, obviously, Mum and Dad were there. Then there was myself, my partner, my 3 kids, and my brother Joel was there too. And Michelle said nothing stood out as being out of the ordinary on Thanksgiving at all. In fact, it was a really lovely day. Everyone enjoyed themselves and were really in high spirits. She said that Joel Jr. was being very much the loving uncle towards her kids, even giving them some of his old toys, which she said she supposed was quite uncharacteristic of him. He was generally quite socially awkward, even at family events. A bit of a recluse, I suppose you could say. But on Thanksgiving, he really seemed to come out of his shell and enjoyed the company. At this stage, the detectives didn't really have any further questions for Michelle, and Michelle insisted that she be the one to break the tragic news to her other siblings because she knew they'd be absolutely devastated, so it was really best it came from her. She also agreed to provide photographs of all her siblings too. So, when the DNA test results came back from the lab, they just confirmed what the detectives already thought they knew, that the victims were indeed Joel and Lisa Guy. Now, when the detectives were going through all the forensic evidence collected from the house, they found 2 sets of receipts. One receipt was for the groceries in the bags on the kitchen floor, but the second receipt was for a bunch of items left in the dining room, which included things like rubbing alcohol, peroxide, and bandages. Now, both of the receipts were dated the 26th of November, which was slap bang in the middle of Thanksgiving and the date the police were called to investigate. Along with an itinerary of the items purchased and the date of purchase, the receipts also showed the times of the purchases. Now, this meant that the detectives were able to see that the groceries had been purchased at 12:18 p.m, and the receipt for the other items showed that they had been purchased roughly 3 hours later. So, the detectives made their way to Walmart to take a look at the security footage to get a look at whoever had made the purchases. So, the security officer pulled up the footage from that day and scrolled straight through to 12:18 p.m. And it was no huge surprise when they saw Lisa on the CCTV paying for her groceries. However, when they scrolled forward another 3 hours and they saw the person who had purchased the other items, the rubbing alcohol, the peroxide and the bandages, this was a huge surprise, and it was also a major lead in the case. Now, this revelation had really helped to paint a picture of exactly what had happened to Joel and Lisa and who had done it. But The biggest break in the case came when the detectives looked through a backpack that had been found at the scene. You see, in this backpack was a notebook. And when they opened the notebook and read what was in it, they were completely shocked. Now, judging by what was in this notebook, I can only presume that the killer planned to return at some point for this backpack, because there's just no way they just left it there intentionally. So, this notebook contained a full, detailed, meticulously planned out murder manifesto. Every step of the murder, the thought process, the itinerary, literally everything had been planned out in this notebook, all in bullet points. I'll read some of it out to you, but honestly, this plan was so detailed I couldn't possibly read it all out. And to be honest, it's just fucking insane. So, 1. Get killing knives, quiet, multiple carving knives to make small pieces. 2. Get sledgehammer, crush bones. 3. Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat. 4. Get bleach, denature proteins. 5. Get plastic bin for denaturation process. I mean, it even says flush chunks down the toilet, not in garbage disposal. Seriously, this is some proper psycho shit. And then it talks about turning the heating up in the house because it accelerates the decomposition process. And you don't have to get rid of the bodies if there's no evidence on the body. So, yeah, this was all very carefully planned. However, the killer clearly hadn't planned for this notebook to be found by the police, because there were other items in that backpack which clearly displayed the name of Joel and Lisa's killer. Ultimately, it was this piece of evidence that led to the arrest and conviction of the murderer. So, during the 2020 trial, based on the Walmart CCTV footage and the murder manifesto written in that notebook, Detective Jeremy McCord laid out a very specific, gruesome reconstruction of what he believed happened to Joel and Lisa Guy. Joel Guy Sr. was upstairs in the spare bedroom enjoying a light cardiovascular workout on his treadmill. He didn't even notice the bedroom door creak open just behind him. Without hesitation, the killer attacked Joel Sr. from behind with a knife. Joel snapped around quickly to face the attacker as blood splattered up the wall. And when Joel saw the face of this person, he was just completely overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, but above all else, he was just shocked and confused. In a frantic fight for his life, Joel tried to wrestle the weapon from his attacker, and a major struggle ensued, resulting in the treadmill being overturned and the blinds being torn. And Joel put up a fight. He fought back really hard. In fact, in the struggle, the attacker actually sustained deep lacerations to their own hands. Unfortunately for Joel, that initial stab wound had started to take its toll on him and his strength faded. The attacker was able to overpower him and plunge the knife deep into his stomach this time, then again, and again, and again. By the end of the ordeal, Joel Sr. had been stabbed a total of 42 times. Some of the wounds were 6 inches deep. With this in mind, he stood no chance. Once Joel had taken his final breath, the attacker prepared for the next stage, dismemberment. They lifted Joel's limp arm and placed the blade of the knife against Joel's wrist and started slicing through skin, ligaments, tendons, and bone. Once they had finished with the first hand, they then removed the second hand. With both of Joel's hands now amputated, the killer positioned them in that prayer pose on the floor. Now, somewhere around this time, Lisa walked through the front door and called up to Joel. She placed the groceries that she'd just purchased from Walmart on the floor and waited for Joel's response. When he hadn't responded after a few seconds, Lisa decided to head upstairs to let her husband know that she was home. When she reached the top of the stairs, the killer emerged from the spare bedroom and launched an immediate attack on poor Lisa. I mean, she didn't even have time to process what was happening before the killer had plunged the knife deep into her flesh. And Lisa was stabbed a total of 31 times. 31 fucking times. Once the killer knew she was dead, they removed her clothing. They left her clothes in a pile at the top of the stairs, then dragged her lifeless body to the master bedroom. Then the killer walked back to the bedroom where Joel's body lay. They removed Joel's clothes and then they dragged Joel's body to the bathroom too. Then, one by one, the killer dragged the bodies into the shower where they used knives to dismember the bodies. Joel's arms and legs were removed at the shoulders and hips, and Lisa's were removed at the elbows and knees. But, disturbingly, Lisa was also completely decapitated. All the body parts were then placed in large plastic bins along with a mixture of sewer cleaner and other harsh chemicals to speed up the decomposition process. Lisa's head was then placed in that pot to boil on the stove, likely as a secondary way to destroy the forensic evidence, should the killer's plan of burning down the house not materialise for some reason. And this plan may well have come to fruition if it hadn't been for the injuries sustained during that first attack on Joel Sr. Now, it's likely that the killer was losing a lot of blood from those wounds, so they went to Walmart to pick up some medical supplies before coming back to finish the plan. However, the rubbing alcohol and bandages weren't quite enough. I mean, these wounds were pretty significant, and they clearly required immediate medical attention. So, the killer resorted to plan B. They turned on all the thermostats up all the way in the house, turned all the heaters on, turned the stove on and the oven, and then they got in their car and headed home to seek medical attention. On Tuesday, November 29th, 2016, at approximately 3:45 p.m, police arrived at an apartment complex in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, the police had been watching the killer for several hours. Then, just as he was walking towards his car, a 2006 Hyundai Sonata in the apartment parking lot, they moved in and apprehended the killer. The man who murdered Joel and Lisa Guy was their very own son, Joel Michael Jr. Joel Jr. killed his parents, dismembered their bodies, and placed his own mother's head in a boiling pot. And at this point, you're probably thinking, why? Well, remember earlier when I said that Joel Sr.'s two daughters hadn't gone to the Thanksgiving celebrations, possibly out of protest for how Joel Jr. was basically being financed by his parents? Well, they kind of had a point. You see, at 27 years old, Joel Jr. had never had a paying job. In fact, his mum and dad literally paid for everything for him. His mum didn't even need to work, she simply worked to fund her son's life. Then, on that Thanksgiving day, at that meal, when Joel Sr. and Lisa announced their retirement plans, they also announced something else. They broke the news that, as of Christmas that year, they would no longer be supporting their son financially, and that he would have to get a job to support himself. And Joel Jr., well, he was absolutely outraged. The audacity of his parents to cut his funding, how fucking dare they? And so, he devised this evil, wicked plan to eliminate them and inherit their money. That murder manifesto didn't just detail how he'd carry out the murders, it also detailed how he'd be gaining from the death of his parents financially. In that notebook, this worthless piece of shit had written out the exact figures of all of his parents' assets and insurance policies. So, Lisa's life insurance policy was worth $500,000, and with his dad out of the way, Joel Jr. would inherit the lot. Then, of course, there was the house and his dad's car and truck. So, Joel Jr. had worked out almost to the dollar how much he stood to inherit from his parents' deaths. So, this was seen by the police as Joel Jr.'s motive for murdering his own mum and dad. Joel Guy Jr. was arrested by police at his home on Tuesday, November 29, 2016. On October 2nd, 2020, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Joel Guy Jr. guilty on all 7 counts. So that's 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 3 counts of felony murder, and 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. For the 2 counts of first-degree murder, he received 2 consecutive life sentences, ensuring that he will serve 1 life term after the other, making him ineligible for parole. The judge imposed these consecutive sentences to reflect the separate murders of his 2 parents. Then, in addition to the life sentences, the judge handed down further punishment for the desecration of the bodies. So, for the 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, he was sentenced to an additional 4 years in prison to be served consecutively to the life terms. That final judgment guarantees that Joel Guy Jr. will spend the rest of his life in prison. And that brings this episode to an end. Don't forget to go down, like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.